Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this live Q&A with Monica Filimon, our guest from New York tonight. The theme for this year's edition is Resilient Together. And I'm very happy that we will be able to explore the theme with Monica tonight and with Ileana. I am Otilia Baraboy. I'm the Executive Director of ARCS and Manager of the Film Festival for the past 7 years. This is the first virtual and national edition as well. We're very happy to have viewers from all over the States. I hope many of you are watching our films and are able to participate to these Q&As. The format is a little bit unusual because you'll have to address your questions in the chat, and Ileana here will forward them to us, and Monica will try to answer to them as best as she can. All right, so Ileana, would you like to say a few words?
Sure. I'm very happy to see Monica again. We had a wonderful conversation in the morning about Malmkrog. And I'm looking forward to this night's conversation about Radu Jude's Uppercase Print, truly interesting film adaptation of a play this time.
All right, so the theme this year is Resilient Together. It is about the power of film and storytelling to keep us together and to help us create change within ourselves and the world. We thought it is the perfect theme for this year because of the pandemic and because we need to be creative and find ways to still keep that sense of belonging and community alive while we're going through the pandemic. So I would like to thank our partners and co-organizers, Northwest Film Forum, as well as our festival partners, UiPath Foundation, and institutional partners, the Romanian Cultural Institute and For Culture. Our private donors and sponsors, local businesses as well, and our volunteers and all our viewers all over the US. I would say a few words about Monica for those of you who don't know her. She has been coming to the festival, as I said, since the very first edition in 2014.
She has been lucky to come to the festival.
Yes. So Monica Filimon was awarded a PhD in comparative literature by Rutgers University. She is Associate Professor of English at Kingsborough Community College at CUNY. She has published articles on French, German, and Romanian films. Her research focuses on the new Romanian cinema, its sources, evolution, and major representatives. Her first book is Cristi Puiu.
It's okay.
With me, because it's not on Cristi Puiu. I had it this morning, right? And that was published by University of Illinois Press in February 2017. And she's currently working on a second book, tentatively titled Corneliu Porumboiu, Notes on the Abuse.
Thank you.
Ileana has it.
I don't even have it with this.
All right. But tonight we will talk about Radu Jude. So
Radu Jude was Puiu's assistant director for The Death of Mr. Lazarescu. Right. That's the connection.
Yes, yes. There is a big connection.
Joking.
Together with Corneliu Porumboiu, Cristi Puiu, Cristian Mungiu, we probably agree that Radu Jude is the most proeminent, one of the most proeminent filmmakers of new Romanian cinema at this time. So, Monica, I have a few questions. It seems that, I will start with this one. It seems that all of Radu Jude's films try to rethink history, especially the most inconvenient parts of our history, of the Romanian history, such as in Aferim, he talked about Roma slavery in Romania. I don't care if we go down in history as barbarians, he talked about the Jewish program in Romania. And now he talks about communism and the human rights situation and freedom of speech in Romania during communist era. What do you think about this common trend in his work. Is this something personal, or that a personal pursuit, or is it more at the collective level, is something that needs to be done, and it's quite fairly common in the work of other directors of the same
I definitely think it's something common for other directors, and only if we look at the films for this year's Seattle Film Festival, we can see a number of them having the same preoccupation with the past, and this is part of a trend. I mean, such a trend is common in all countries that have been through a dictatorship of some sort. I think Karl Jaspers termed this working through the past in relation to the German. He has a book titled "The Question of the German Guilt" after the Second World War. It's definitely part of a collective trend. I watched a few interviews today with Radu Jude, and the same question was addressed to him, and he said, well, yeah, a number of them are quite in quick succession. Dead Nation, I don't care if we go down in history as barbarians, Uppercase Print, and he has another one, I think it's called The Exit of Trains or something like that. Mm-hmm. And that was released at the same time with this one. And he said it just happened that they dealt with the past. Others, the ones that will follow them, are anchored in the present times. I don't think it just happens. I think for all of us, once you have a nagging question, you are bound to pursue it until you find some kind of resolution for you. And he already has 3 films that that deal with the issue of Romanian pogroms against the Jewish population in Romania. So I think at least in that case, it's more than that. And as far as communism is concerned, we all have to address the trauma of communism, at least those who were 10 years old when communism fell. So I think it's both, a response to the times, but also a personal pursuit.
And he does, I have 2 quotes from him. He says at some point, there is no reason to deal with history unless you can find something in it in the present time. So what do you think he's finding in the present time that is still nagging him, and he feels like we should still talk about it 30 years after the fall of communism, and even more after the pogroms?
I think the film focuses on this young students, this young man's cry for justice and liberty, but it also focuses on the lack of solidarity and the acquiescence of the large population that just kept silent during communism, and that, Romania is known to be one of the countries with the lowest number of dissidents within the Eastern European bloc. It's not by chance. The Romanian communist regime was probably the most repressive one. But it's also a question of, how many people kept silent because they wanted to preserve their lives, and how many people kept silent because they were not bothered by what was going on, and how many people kept silent because they believed in the propaganda and the manipulation of the media at the time. And the issue of the media, I think, and the manipulation that's done by a state via the media is one that is very prominent today as well. It's I stopped watching Romanian television because it bothered me, but I have friends and they all talk about how the press, is manipulating in one way or another. These are issues that we are confronting in the United States as well. I think Habermas called this advent of media power the feudalization of society. of the public sphere, because he argues that all discourses in the public sphere are no longer are no longer brought up from the grassroots up, but are imposed on the public sphere by media by media companies, and are coordinated through media companies. So there's not a direct connection between the regular citizen and the state. There's not a dialogue that starts with the regular citizen. There's always a dialogue that's imposed. The topics of this dialogue and the directions of the dialogue are imposed by media companies that are and are not connected with the state. That's less important. What I think is very present is the feeling that we are being manipulated, and I think that was common in communism and in any other dictatorship. So I think that's, to me, that was eerie. Living in the United States, we have this issue of the fake news, and then watching communist kitsch propaganda in Radu Jude's film. It was just eerie. And
yeah, I was going to ask you, so do you think that there is a connection between the fact that there were many inserts of archives, the pro-communist propaganda, and the testimonials of the main character, and there was this juxtaposition created an echo that made us question, the role of media in our lives and how it dictates social behaviors. And you could see at the fake, the trial, that the main character had to went through. People were just talking in slogans. There's no real speech, no communication, real communication between the characters.
Yes. Absolutely. I mean, we used to call it limba de lemn, dead language, I guess. And it is obvious. You can see. So the actors are, in fact, not reading because they didn't have it on a prompter, but they've learned by heart parts of the Securitate file, of the secret police file for Mugur Călinescu, the protagonist. And they read it out in a very flat tone. And the juxtaposition with the images from Romanian television is, I would say the juxtaposition is the connection between the two, the relationship between the two parts of the film is an ironic one. We have, I noted a few examples. We have, for example, a short movie about the statue, the thinker, and then immediately after we have a secret police officer, reciting some stupid thing. I mean, it's obvious to me that that's ironic. Then we have a short, and I think that's actually very important. It's right at the beginning of the film. We have a short film about the solidarity, the ethnic solidarity. And we see a lot of people working, in a factory. And then immediately after, you have a secret police informer. So a lot, maybe if American viewers are watching us, they probably don't understand the institution of the informer. Many of these informants were just regular people. Some of them were asked to give these declarations, but others went, not in this case, maybe not until he was known, but others just went on their own and informed on their neighbors, on their relatives, and so on. So the lack of solidarity with people who are living in the same terrible circumstances as you are, as we were all, is outstanding. And I think the flatness of the tone, a lot of viewers noted the flatness of the tone, both in the readings from the files, and obviously the tone in the many archival footage pieces. I think that flatness, that lack of affect and lack of emotion is symbolically another way of indicating this lack of solidarity.
Yes, the main character says at some point that what is the point to write, graffiti to be, and for which he was considered a terrorist. So it was not vandalism, like in a normal cut, it would be just, you vandalized state property. For in his case, it was considered an act of terrorism. But his friends betray him. So I think that was the most, for him, it was heartbreaking. And the fact that he was preaching alone in the desert, basically.
Yeah. And we don't know the circumstances when they betrayed them. I read an interview with his mother immediately after the film because I hadn't known about him, so I wanted to know more. And she points out that was that most disturbed him, and for which he despaired, the fact that his own friends betrayed him. That was something that made a difference in his approach. If you see towards the end of the film, he appears to have been changed, re-educated, right? But
yeah.
Yes, but rehabilitated. But in fact, it's clear that somebody has dictated in the same dead language the parts that he was supposed to write, and it reminded me of another text by Václav Havel. The text, I think, is The Power of the Powerless. And Havel made the difference between living within a lie and living in truth in communist regimes. And he had this example of a grocer who puts up a sign, workers unite or something like that in the window, and he argues, now does he put the sign because he believes in it, or does he put the sign because if he didn't, then the party would focus on him as a dissident, or whatever you call, as an opponent of the regime. So he says people I think the essay was written in the late 70s. I don't remember the year exactly, but I think it was shortly before he went to prison. In communist regimes, people learn to live within a lie, learn to perform what was expected of them to perform, whether they believed in it or not, and just went about their day, their lives. And he opposes that to living in truth, or within, I don't remember, living in truth, when you oppose the regime, when you point out the breaks, the cracks in the discourse of the regime. It's exactly what Mugur Călinescu, the protagonist, does. And everybody else around them, including his parents at some point, although it's not clear, how much they were coerced to say those things and how much they thought they would save him if they say those things. But it's clear that nobody around him takes the same responsibility that he does.
Monica, do you think this is why, first of all, I mean, this is based on a play, and Radu Jude worked with Gianina Cărbunariu, but do you think for both of them, that's why Mugur was a hero, the hero for the play and the film, because he was alone? Do you think this is what was attracting? Because they could have found maybe somebody else, that was more impactful and more known as a dissident. Because this case was largely unknown, actually.
I thought about it a lot, and in fact, I like it that he didn't focus on prominent dissidents. There is, I think, the Memorialul Durerii. There is a series of DVDs directed by Lucia Hosul Longin that include a lot of interviews with very famous Romanian dissidents. I think it's actually the beauty of the fact that this very young, innocent, slightly naive man, a young man, thinks that he can change people's consciousness, people's reaction, that he can poke at the regime and be free to say what he wants to say. And I think it's also a little bit of naivety in believing that, or in maybe he believes, who knows, that in believing that maybe people around him don't know what's going on in other countries, that maybe they don't listen to Radio Free Europe, that maybe if somebody told them, they would do something, because we all, we all believe those things at that age.
He thought he was the messenger of
Yes.
something important, that people didn't know what was going on in Poland.
Yes. So I think it wasn't Radu Jude's choice. Obviously, it was the director's, Gianina Cărbunariu's choice. But I think it's an exquisite choice, especially because it's about, regular person that lives a quiet life in a provincial town, that goes through a year of interrogation and harassment by the secret police, recant, is rehabilitated, and as we know about as we know a little bit from the I don't even know if it's a documentary, I don't think it's a documentary, from the essay film. He died in 1985 of leukemia, and his parents believe that he was poisoned, irradiated by the secret police, and this was something that the secret police used to do in Romania in order to get rid of dissidents. I did a little bit of research just because I was curious. His body was taken out in 2017, and they did some kind of blood test or whatever, DNA test, but they were inconclusive. So the cause of his death is still unknown. And his mother, at least in 2017, was still alive. And it was, that was 30 years after he died. She was 72, so she was probably 40. For some reason, it just moved me, the fact that the mother is the one who is who keeps trying to find out what happened to him. And I also found out that he is part of the exhibition at Sighetu, in Sighet, I think, where we have this memorial for the fighters against communism, for the dissidents against communism, and apparently he is featured he is featured there as well.
Yeah. I had, so when we first announced the lineup, I had a few reactions on Facebook. One of them was saying, oh, I had enough of films about communism. Can we just move on? It's been a long time. Can we just talk about other things in our past? And it's true. I mean, every year we bring films, we cannot go around these films that talk about communism. What do you think, that we have an obsession, or do you think there's still something that's not resolved and needs to be, still investigated?
I think it's not enough. I mean, just think of this, that there are young people in Romania who were born after communism and who know very little. If you ask some of them, they don't even know very clearly who Ceausescu is. And I think that's terrible after you go through school. I was shocked a few summers ago when I was in Romania. They did some interviews on the street. Not that they are relevant, but I was just shocked by their answers. And to me, that's, those who forget their past are doomed to repeat it. Not in the same way, in a different way, but repeat it nevertheless. I think we, as a nation, we need to deal not only with communism, as something foreign or whatever, strange, imposed on us, but as something that everybody, or most people, were complicit with, because people chose, for good reasons. They were afraid for their lives, for their families' lives. It was a very repressive system, but to some degree that is a collective guilt, and you can only move past it once you admit it as a collective guilt. And I think that these films are trying to do that, not in a moralistic, in a moralistic way. I don't think that's the way to do it, but at least they raise questions about humanity our humanity, the humanity of those around them in regimes like the communist, in totalitarian regimes. I mean, the Romanian communist regime was not the only one. It's not going to be the only one, unfortunately, to deal with dissidents in this way.
And it's true, we also have this sense of guilt that the more we talk about it, the more people don't want to listen. I mean, people who are not part of of communism. And at some point you're like, okay, should we draw a line and move on? But then how can you move on if it's, the past is still reflected in the present? Exactly like Jude said, we still in Romania, we're dealing with it, with the traces of it at every level, at the administration, corruption, everything. It's still there, so how can we move on? How can we forget, right?
I'm not for forgetting or moving on, frankly. I think we need to deal with it for the time that we need to deal with it. And I don't think we should be apologetic about it, or, there are other nations that are dealing. I mean, there are movies about slavery right now, and America has not moved on from the terrible legacy of slavery. So it takes what it takes. It's not, I don't think it's a prescribed time or
and I think with any trauma, like it happened with the Holocaust, it took years, tens of years actually, to people to open up and really confess, say what was going on. So I think we will be hearing stories
absolutely
from now, actually, and we'll discover these hidden,
I think that it will be interesting for the generations that were born after 1989, how much they deal with it, how much they have this post-memory trauma. But for the generations, for us, I was 13 in 1989. I can still remember vividly what it was like. And for those who are older than me, even more so. It's part of your life, and it's connected with your childhood, your young age. It's intrinsically connected to it. So you cannot move away from it that easily.
Yeah. And while if I see that we still don't have any questions, I encourage people who are present on Eventive to send us questions. In the meantime, I have another question about the technical, his choices. There is like straight to camera monologues, a lot of that. So maybe that's why it's not very, it's uncomfortable in a way, to watch. And there is like a splash, I was reading a splash of pop art, and I feel like there is some kitsch features, that were used in the film to create the sets. Of course, that's a commentary on theater, the fact that this topic originated in theater. So what do you think about this aesthetic choices?
I didn't have time to rewatch it, but Alexandru Solomon has a documentary about, it's an essay film about Radio Free Europe, titled Cold Waves. And if I remember correctly, he uses the same kind of reenactment of, I think in his case, those are fictional scenes, completely fictional, but maybe I'm wrong. So that reminded me of that a lot. He, in one of his interviews, Jude talks about the choice for the sets, and that they thought they wanted to film it somewhere else, but it cost a lot. Then they decided to film it on a stage-like set. And then somebody came up with the idea of setting up the set as a panopticon. Panopticon, and you can see that the film starts with a quote from Michel Foucault. Panopticon is this ideal prison that actually is based on reality that existed, a circular prison described by Foucault, with a guard seated in the middle. You know, you have the cells on the circumference of the circle, and then you have the light coming through the windows of the cell. So the guard can see each prisoner in the cell at all points. And Foucault argues that in time, the gaze of the guard is internalized by the prisoners, and they end up disciplining themselves. So it's no longer necessary for the guard to discipline them. And the idea of the panopticon in Romanian society, I mean, that's exactly what happened. A lot of people said nothing or did nothing, or did even more than was necessary, because they internalized the gaze of the party, the gaze of the state, and they tried, you know, to stay within the limits that they thought were the limits of their own, that they thought they, you know, were the limits of the state, but they thought that they were the limits of their own making to some degree. So the set is a panopticon. He then makes, I mean, Jude says that, you know, when we started recording, it was like filming in a bucket. There was a huge echo. So apparently they had great difficulty in trying to deal with the sound in that respect. And yes, I think it's very artificial. I'm not a fan. I understand why he did it. It's the Brechtian distance. You need to distance the viewer from whatever goes on, so that the viewer can have this judgment, you know, can be rational and judge and understand critically what's going on.
So Ilan, I see that we have a question or a comment.
Yeah, we have a comment from Cristi Purvulescu saying, apocryphal quote, journalist to modern Chinese premier, what do you think of the French Revolution? Here saying, it's too early to tell. And we have a nice question from Michelle Aoki, who is saying that she was in Romania in 1973, 1976 to 77, 79 and 81. It is honestly hard for me, she's saying, to imagine it post-communism. How will I experience it as different when I can finally travel there again?
Yeah, I was born in 76. That's yeah, I mean there were politicians, you know, we know of the infamous quote by, I think, Burladano was his name, that it takes 20 years for people to
Silviu Brucan.
Brucan, there you go. So I don't remember that. Yes.
Yeah.
The one with the stupid people quote as well, that it takes 20 years, and then later on others said 20, 50 years for generations to change, you know, for politics to be, I don't want to say purified of communist elements, but, you know, at least purged of communist thinking. Communism became a way, I mean, it replaced religion, and it was a way of thinking beyond being a political regime.
But the corruption, getting away with little things, right?
Yeah.
So that's something that's very...
The corruption, the us versus them,
right.
that exists, that, I mean, Americans are now shocked by us versus them if you think of Republicans and Democrats, but that kind of mentality is one that is forged and generated and fostered by dictatorial regimes, this kind of split divide and conquer, this kind of split in society.
Yeah.
We have another question from Jamie Lannister, who is saying, what are some positives, if any, that came from the propaganda / Big Brother state?
Free education. I don't know, other than in a very short time, in the mainly in the 60s and 70s, a little bit starting with the 50s, they had this massive effort that was both good and bad. Massive effort to modernize cities and to move cities from the villages, to move people from the villages into the cities, and to you know, give them a place to live, give them a free education. So and that was, you know, it's debatable whether that would have happened in any other regime, but you know, we can deal with counter history. The history is what it is. So that did happen. And there were many people from the countryside who had access, I think, to education that wouldn't otherwise have had.
I would also add apartments, so places to live. Even though they were extremely small, almost everybody, not almost, everybody had a place where they would work and a place where they would live.
Yeah, yeah, and it you know, it ended up in that funny town village mix of people, you know, raising chickens in front of the apartment buildings and, you know, planting vegetables and things like that. So yeah, I don't see, other than the free education, I don't see
Well, Monica, can we, if we are to connect Malmkrog, you know, the discussion between the elites and then what happened, you know, the big revolution and the turmoil at the level of classes. What do you think? You know, was that a positive outcome? Was that bound to happen because of the aloofness of the elites and the ruling class?
I don't know if that was bound to happen in Romania necessarily. I think Romania was a little bit different from Russia. There was this divorce, but I don't think there was this divorce between the different levels of society. But and there wasn't a big relevant middle class in Romania pre-communism, except for the cities. So there was this difference, I would say, between the village and the city in Romania. But would it have ended in a revolution without the influence of the Russian Empire? I doubt it. I doubt it. And then what happened in Romania was horrendous. It's what happened in, you know, Poland and in other countries, the absolute destruction of the middle class, you know, the imprisonment, the disappearance, the elimination of anybody who had any kind of intellectual pursuit, you know, and did not adhere immediately to the regime, was marginalized, if not imprisoned or eliminated in some other form. And it's very difficult to reconstruct that kind of middle class and that kind of you know, intellectual class. It took tens of years to reconstruct it.
Right, even today, probably that's still.
Yeah, I think we are doing better now.
We are. Oh yeah, much better. Yeah,
but in the 50s, that was just what happened in the 40s and 50s. It was just horrendous.
By the way, if anybody listening now, we recommend So What's Freedom? It's exactly about this period of where Monica's talking about, where people got deported in the middle of nowhere in the Romanian Siberia, and there were just intellectuals, teachers.
Yes.
Who knew French, or I mean, Yeah.
It was anybody who could have posed the threat of, you know, standing up to the regime in some form, even if it was in the form of a joke, or, you know, that was very dangerous at the time. But I still remember, you know, late 80s, I still remember one of my teachers in class making anti-communist jokes in class. So it, people had the freedom that they gave themselves to some degree, especially I think towards the after 1985, after Gorbachev came to power in USSR, in the former USSR. You could sense, I mean, we were young, but probably other people could sense the beginning of the end, because I clearly remember my English teacher making jokes against communists in class, and he wasn't a member of the Communist Party. So
There's also a talk about the fact that if Mugur would have done his act, his terrorist act before 64, he would have gotten 15 years in prison.
yes,
but because it was, you know, there were some reforms, he got hassled, you know, and re-educated, but yeah, they did not imprison him. And
yeah.
I have another question.
We have a comment from Roxana Teodorescu saying that, in her opinion, Mugur Călinescu's real drama was that nobody was on his side, including family. And it was very sad to see that everybody was trying to prove him wrong, including his family. He was alone, and she's ending the comment saying, "I'm really sad he did not live to see the Romanian Revolution."
Yes, I'm very careful about, you know, Securitate files and the secret police files and what his parents declared. I don't know too much about his father, but I sense that his mother was just desperate to save him, and that maybe she was misguided in what she declared. You know, maybe she was told to declare certain things to save him. I don't think she was in any way against him at all. I think those were the acts of a desperate woman, and a lot of you know, a lot of people went through these kind of things, and when people had to declare things out of desperation, I can certainly understand that. There were two categories, you know, people who declared out of desperation because they were forced and because they thought they would save themselves or others, and, you know, they declared certain things, and people who did it for some kind of material or social benefit. And there were, I mean, there was a sordid joke, you know, in Romania, not joke, but sort of a line that those who that the problem was not that the Securitate didn't have enough informers, that the problem was that there were too many people offering to inform on others, and, you know, they couldn't take them all. And we know what happened to the Stasi from another film, right? To The Lives of Others. To the Stasi files, they had so many informing notes that they got lost in them. You know, it's like, you know, watching somebody, surveilling somebody until there's no point in surveillance because, you know, it's too much of it and nobody can watch the tapes. I don't know if that was the case in Romania, but you know, there are lots of people who are informing on others. And if you lived in, I mean, I had this personal experience. My parents, my family, we knew who were the informers around us. And I think your family knew and other people knew. I mean, it wasn't, you were trying to stay away from people you knew and from people you guessed as informers. You know, you suppose they were informers.
Monica, I have a question myself, if I may, because I read in one of his interviews that he said that Gianina made a collage and I made a montage. What's new? Why the film? Because I got the idea that staging, you know, on a stage, the Securitate files make sense as a play. but staging the staging of a play, and following the theatricality of a play. What was that about?
I don't know the play, so I'm not sure. My understanding was that he went through the archives of the Romanian television, and he selected the clips that we see in the film. So I'm not sure how much of that was included in the play on stage, you know, and how much he added that. And I think it's not necessarily new, you know, the actors reciting parts of the Securitate file. That may not be new, but it is preserved through the medium of film. A play is to some degree ephemeral unless it is recorded in some form. This is not something new. He has adopted this kind of work with materials from the archives in his other films. So it's definitely an interest of him. And he points out that he, you know, is inspired by other film scholars. He mentions Eisenstein especially, and he thinks that the final product, you know, how to turn history into a product for others is what animates him. You know, how to give history a form is what animates him. And I think that's why he took up this project. And my impression was that it's very close to the autobiography of Nicolae Ceausescu, Ujica's film, that's based exclusively on archival, both personal and state archives, archival material about Ceausescu. And Jude in an interview says, you know, people have wrongly made the comparison with Ujica's film. In Ujica's film, he's trying to reconstruct the story of Ceausescu, but here I'm trying to deconstruct the story of the secret file of the and point out, you know, the cracks in the file and how things were made up in the file. I'm not so convinced that his own film reconstructs the story of Mugur Călinescu to some degree at that point. So yeah, you can see it this way or that way, I guess. But it's definitely one of Jude's interests, the work with archival material and reshaping them in a different discourse, or reshaping them to point out certain incompatibilities within the material itself. That's definitely one of his preoccupations.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
I'm not sure if I'm very coherent at this late time for me.
We don't have any other questions from the chat.
I'm just looking through my notes to see if there was anything else that
There's a lot of archival footage about youth, about Ceausescu's obsession with youth, and how we are, you know, the ones who are building communism and changing.
And how ironic that the same youth depicted in this movie were the people who went out in 1989 into the streets. I mean, Mugur was 17 in 1981, so he was probably born in 64. So he was what, 25 at the time of the revolution. Those were the people who went out in the streets against Ceausescu. And yes, I noticed the same thing. And I noticed there was a scene with Show Me Patrie. I don't even know how to translate that into English, with a very young 4 or 5-year-old kids. And I was 5 in 1981. That was strange. What's interesting, I mean, I like some of the choices that he made. I like the beginning, very much the beginning of of his movie, with the people reciting and then completely silent. and just looking around, and then somebody asks them and they say, you know, there are no words on the prompter. I think that's symbolic, right? You only said what was given to you. You only said in the public sphere, let's just put it that way, what was given to you via, you know, the big communist prompter that we all had everywhere. Otherwise, you stayed silent. I thought that that was an interesting choice and a very good one at the beginning.
Do you think, Monica, he is alluding to the fact that there are changes being made now in Romania, and it's the street that made the young, you know, that they're going out and making these changes. In '89, it was the young, you know, who made the political change. Is it again like kind of like a reminder of you know, this unknown hero who fought alone? And who knew very well what happened? Was it like a reminder that we're not alone, and if you know that we need to keep hope because change will come if we're brave?
Yeah, I mean, change is, to me, change is incremental. Revolutions are made mostly by young people because they have the you know, their brains are not fully developed, so they don't have the same sense of danger as people in their 40s like me. They don't have, you know, anywhere in the world changes are made by young people. So yes, there is an element of hope out there for sure.
And it feels like Romania still needs that right now, you know, still needs, you know, that hope and change brought by generations that are not contaminated by the, you know, communist mentalities that maybe can who travel and come back and make these changes at the political level.
Yes, but this is not a new situation. I mean, 1848, right? The changes that happened in what is now Romania came from people who were educated abroad. Most people, you know, at the time were educated abroad. In our case, I mean, Romania today, yes, there is an element of hope in people, you know, regarding changes that will be brought by younger people. But I think there's also a sense that young people are leaving in droves. I don't know, I'm neither pessimistic nor optimistic about the fate of Romania as with the United States. I think there are positives and negatives in any case. Yes, people go out in the street, especially because they are young and they don't have this kind of legacy of an oppressive regime, and they have more hope than people who have been through an oppressive regime and are aware of what could happen. So yeah, we need that kind of hope. But you know, the more they go out through the streets and the less change happens, I wonder where they will end up, you know, what they will end up thinking. I think it's just patience that's needed. Any change, to me, will be very, very small, but small changes end up in a big change at some point in you know, after generation.
Right. I see that we have another question.
We have a question from Teodora Baba asking, what can the new generation learn from Romania's history and the dictatorial regime? And I think you already touched on it at the beginning of our conversation. And then we have another question that is more general.
I mean, the only thing that you can learn from it is not to keep silent. That's, you know, in any, you know, if you are a writer, write. If you are a teacher, you know, teach others and make them aware. If you are a painter, paint about. I mean, you don't have to go out in the street and protest in any form that's open, but you have to keep speaking up in, you know, in the small area where you work. I think that's important, because the people who become silent are people who are doomed to be ruled by dictators at some point.
I would also add that the films, the Romanian new cinema does a wonderful job educating the younger generation through a medium that appeals to them more than the classical history books that are so dry and that don't make much sense to them. Yeah.
Yeah, we hope that the new Romanian cinema, there's Porumboiu told me about this, and I wrote about it several times. He went to a mall to see a Romanian movie, and he asked, I assume he was with his wife, took tickets for title X. And the woman selling him the tickets looked at him and said, "You do realize that's a Romanian movie?" And he said, "Yes, and you still want the tickets." So I don't know how many young people go to see Romanian movies about communism, but hopefully at least some of them do. And then they stay in Romania.
Yeah.
Do we have another question, Ilana?
It's more like a comment. Vicky Sangriu is saying if you could speak a bit about why Romania, unlike the rest of former Iron Curtain countries like Poland, still has a hard time integrating in capitalism with a strong sense of lack of trust of others. More general question.
I think from what I have read, the degree of repression in Romania and the degree of public hysteria related to who is informing on whom and about what was one of the highest in Eastern Europe. It was unprecedented. It wasn't something that I've read about in the Czech Republic or Poland or other countries. And the mistrust comes, it's something that's much deeper, that goes from generation to generation. It's something that's inherited. It's not something that your parents have and then you trust everybody because your parents raised you. So you inherit that kind of mistrust. So that's my only explanation for it. I don't have another. I don't think that Romanians are predisposed genetically, to mistrust others. I just think that they lived in one of the worst regimes.
Although there's studies now that say that trauma is transmitted from one generation to another.
Yeah, there is. I think it's called Post Memory. There is a book about photography and by Marianne Hirsch. Yeah, yes. Who was Romanian.
Romanian, yeah, from Chernobyl. I mean, yeah, Romanian and many other things.
Yes.
Yeah.
We all, we'd like to call her Romanian. Actually, she's a very nice person.
Yeah, she does. Yeah. But it's interesting that in post memory, you are the one that is not aware actually of the trauma, but acts, the trauma informs your actions without you knowing it. So it's exactly what's probably going on at the level of the new generation that didn't directly experience communism.
So that's why the 20 years is just too short of a time. 50 years is more like it.
So that's striking when you hear that, oh, we should stop talking about communism. We should not. We should at least 50 years. It's been like that with Holocaust. It's been like that with the war in Algeria. There was so many, at least 50 years when after people started, kind of opening up and.
Well, I mean, it's not only I think that we shouldn't, discuss only the issue of communism. We should also discuss, what Romania did during the Second World War. That's also, exactly. A part of our history that we should go back and explore.
One doesn't go without the other for us. And I think people tend to think, oh, it's just communism. No, we're pretty much tied to what happened before with the right extremists or the Iron Guard and more, you know, the communist prisons were filled up with the iron guard, you know, adepts, you know, also. So that,
yeah, there's, you know, there was that song in Romania. I'll just say it in Romanian and then we'll try to translate it. Comandante, nu fi trist. Do you know it?
I don't know.
Garda de fier merge înainte prin Partidul Comunist. So for English speakers, the song addresses the commander of the Iron Guard, and it's Captain, don't be sad because the Iron Guard moves on through the Communist Party, because a lot of people from the Iron Guard then populated the ranks of the Communist Party. A lot of them, you know, were imprisoned, but a lot of them were not. Well, a lot of them just became members of the Communist Party.
yeah.
They just changed the color of their shirts.
Yes. That's right. Yeah. So it's why there is this level of mistrust in Romanian society. It's connected to that repression. It's connected to the degree of corruption. Maybe there is corruption in other countries and I don't see it. That's obviously always possible. But I was talking with a Russian friend, and he's married to a Romanian woman, and she was born, I think, in '87. And he's a little bit older, and he and I agreed on one thing. You know, there is the corruption in Romania is different from the corruption in the United States. In Romania, the corruption goes to the level of the small person who sells you something, or who is in an institution and you need some kind of document and you depend on that person. You know, you can, I was talking to one of my friends in Craiova, there is a lack of Tylenol, you know, paracetamol now because of COVID. And he said, yeah, but if you know somebody, you can always find, you know, you can always get whatever you need. So knowing somebody in Romania, you know, having some kind of connection still exists. And that level of corruption was the result of the communist regime.
But the level of corruption in collective that was unearthed, I mean, in collective is amazing. I mean, it's
but that's already high level corruption, you know.
But it starts at the level where people are okay to risking somebody's life if it doesn't affect them directly.
Yes.
You know, so it didn't matter. Yeah.
It's an indifference that is the result of this lack of solidarity and this estrangement of people in the communist regime, in a dictatorial regime. It doesn't matter if it's communist or right wing, but
yeah,
it's the same.
I do recommend for people who are hearing us now to see Collective, and also maybe try to watch the recording as well. We'll do a recording tomorrow with Alex now, to understand to the degree to which people are immune to these things. But
my mother was telling me that apparently there's some news that something similar happened to some other hospital just recently in Romania. There's some other fire and 10 people died. It's just recent, like yesterday or today.
Terrible. Yeah. All right. I think we are about to wrap up. Thank you so much, Monica. I think you will be able to see Monica at the recorded Q&A with Alex Nanau for Collective next week. The film is not available before November 21st because it is launched nationally on November 20th. So we're right there. We brought it just in time for you at the Romanian Film Festival. So we do hope we'll see more of you in the next days. Thank you, Monica, again. It was a pleasure.
I just wanted to say thank you. It was great to see you both. I wish I could have seen you in person.
We too.
Ilana, say hello to Jim.
I will.
And Otilia, say hello to Tudor.
Yes.
And I'm looking
People are
forward.
thanking you on Eventive, so it's not only us.
Thank
Everybody
you. Yes, I mean,
participated.
frankly, I miss a lot of people. I'm scrolling through Facebook. I don't go on Facebook too often. I usually go on Facebook when I go to Seattle because I need to promote the festival. but this year, because of the political thing, I just needed an outlet. So I
Yeah.
go on Facebook and I reshare a lot of the posts of people in Seattle, and I realize I have the same. We have the same kind of thinking. So yes,
People
I miss a
came to
lot of
see our
people there.
films. Yeah,
Miss you, Monica, so much. Yeah. So hopefully next year we'll have a hybrid format, and you will be here in person.
I hope so. Yes.
Yes.
Well, there's a Romanian. I'll just say this. Garabeti Brăileanu has a line in one of his at the end of Adela, and you know, she told me that she would meet me tomorrow at 4. What an audacity to think that she'll be alive tomorrow by 4. So, yes, let's have the audacity to think that I'll be okay and alive.
Anything is possible, right? I
To
mean,
end up in a, you know, and this is not the result of communism. Brăileanu lived way before that.
Yeah. Well, who would have thought? Yeah.
Yes.
But anyway, let's hope for the best.
Yes.
Thank you so much. Have a wonderful night, everybody, and I hope you can join us in less than 30 minutes for the Q&A with Dragoș Turia from the Republic of Moldova on the Soviet Garden. So more films about communism. Again, I mean, it's obvious that we can just not stop talking about it. So,
well, we ended up laughing, so that's not bad.
yes. Thank you so
Take
much.
care.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.